Okay, so what is decimals? When we talk about decimals, we are talking about, it's another way of writing part of a whole number. What does that mean, part of a whole number? So let's just have a look at this. If I write down the number, okay, my board's very small. Okay, if I write down the number 1/8. Okay, how do I convert this into a decimal? 1/8 is equal to 0.125. Okay, 1/8 of 1,000 is equal to 0.125. So to convert a fraction to a decimal number, we simply divide the numerator by the denominator. This is done, you can, guys, this you can do, it's easy and simple by just using your scientific calculator. So basically 3/8 is equal to the same as 3 divided by 8. Okay? You guys can see this? So 3 divided by 8 is equal to, so if you have to divide that, your answer will be 3,375. So when we are converting fractions to decimal numbers, the rule is divide the numerator by the denominator. Okay, everybody's happy with that. So let's do a few examples now to see whether we get that concept of dividing numerator by denominator. So if I have 3/5, what I am saying is 3 divided by 5, and 3 divided by 5, if you have your calculator on your table with you, is 0.6. Then if we look at 4/5, we are simply saying 4 divided by 5, and our answer should be 0.8. What about 11/20? We are once again saying 11 divided by 20. So guys, we are repeating this over again. We're saying when we want to convert fractions to a decimal number, we divide the numerator by the denominator. So in this instance, your answer will be 0.55. Let's do one more. 16/25 is the same as 16 divided by 25, and if you calculate that, it'll be 0.64. Anybody unsure of what I'm doing? Okay, everybody understands how to divide, how to convert a fraction to a decimal number. Okay, for those of you that's just joined us, we are converting decimals, we're converting fractions to decimal numbers. Okay, so it's pretty much straightforward, guys. Just divide numerator by denominator and you will have your decimal number. Okay, so moving along. What are some of the rules we should apply when we are converting decimals to a fraction? So for example, if I had to take 0.1 and I want to now turn this into a fraction, what should I possibly do? Okay, remember this, the 0.1 tells us the place value. In this instance, 0.1 is simply 1/10. Okay, everybody agrees. And 0.7 is simply 7/10. Now, if I have 0.4, what will it then be? So, looking once again at the place values and where it is, I have to then say it's equal to 4/10. But 4/10 can be further simplified. If I divide by 2 and divide by 2, my answer will then be 2/5. What about 7,3? How will I convert this decimal number into a fraction? Firstly, when we have a number before the decimal spacing, before the decimal dot, when we have a number before it, automatically we should know that our fraction is going to be an improper fraction, okay? So we're going to have a whole number and a fraction. So in this instance, 7,3 will become 73/10. Okay, and therefore 73 divided into 10 divided into 73, our answer will be 7 and 3/10. Okay, everybody understands it. When you have a number in front of the decimal, then we know we're going to have an improper fraction, and always, guys, we are dividing the numerator by the denominator, and that's how we get our answer. Is anybody unsure? Okay, it's good. Now, what are some of the rules we can apply when we're working with decimal numbers? Firstly, guys, rule number 1. Okay, rule number 1, we always line them up. What do I mean when I say line them up? If I had to add 1,4 plus 6.75, I always have to line it up. So I'll say 1.4 plus 6.75. Can you see how the decimals are falling, or how the numbers are falling under each other? 15.1 minus 7/95. So rule number 1, line them up. Make sure your numbers are aligned. Rule number 2. Rule number 2 is drop it down. What does drop it down mean? That means wherever the decimal dot is, when you're adding, you take it down to the very same space. Okay, so rule 1, line them up. Rule 2, drop it down. Okay, so I'm just going to clear out my drawing. What then is rule number 3? Rule number 3 is fill them in. So rule number 1 is line them up. Rule number 2 is drop it down. And rule number 3 is fold them in. What does that mean? So remember, I wrote down 4,1 and I wrote down 6.75. Do you remember that? So when I say fold them in here goes a 0. And I had 15.1 and I said minus 7.95. Fold them in means in goes a 0. Okay. So let's go over our rules for calculating, adding or subtracting decimal numbers. Rule number 1, line them up. Rule number 2, drop it down. So that means the dots must follow through when we are adding. It must fall on the same spot. And rule number 3, fill them in. Okay, it also helps to simplify and make addition and subtractions so much easier. Before I move along, is there anybody unsure? Okay, so now, what then should we do with when we are, okay, so now we know that when we are converting from fractions to decimals, we divide the numerator and denominator. We've learned some of the rules of how we add and subtract decimal numbers. Now, alternatively, when we need to convert percentages, how do we do that? Okay, so when we're converting fractions to percentages, so or should I say decimal numbers to fractions. How do we convert decimal numbers to fractions? Firstly, if I have a number like that, automatically I know this goes to the right. Okay, you move the decimal point to the right. So 0.25 becomes 25%. That's easy enough. Yes? So when we're converting, and this is it, we need to convert a decimal number to the fractions. Always move the decimal point to the right. Okay. Alternatively, to convert the percentage to a decimal number or fraction and multiply, we can multiply here. So alternatively, converting the percentage to a decimal number or a fraction, we can multiply by 100. So if we multiply by 100, you'll come up with the same answer. Okay. Now, to write one quantity as a percentage of another, we write the first quantity as a fraction and the second quantity we multiply by 100. Okay, let me repeat that. To write one quantity as a percentage of another, we write the first quantity as a fraction and the second we multiply by 100. What do I mean by this? So if I say 120, what percentage is 100 and what percentage is 120 is of 24? What percentage 120 is of 24? What did I say first we do? We write the first quantity as a fraction. So we say 24 over 120. That's the first quantity. We write it as a fraction. And the second part, we multiply by 100. Okay, so simply said, guys, is we divide the top and bottom by 24, the numerator and denominator. If I divide by 24 and divide by 24, it will be equal to 1 over 5. But it doesn't stop there. I go a step further and I say multiply by 100. So 5, I say multiply 100, yes, quite correct. And then 5 divided by 100 will give us 20%. Okay. Are we good with that? Okay. So when calculating a percentage, whether we are increasing or decreasing a percentage, okay, what do we do? If we a quantity, remember firstly, guys, all percentages are calculated out of 100%, okay? So before I carry on, if I have to say, how do I write 75, for example? So 75%, how do I put that into a fraction? How would I put 75% into a fraction? Firstly, we said because it's a percentage, it's out of 100. I will say 75 over 100. Okay, and how do I work out that? I divide by 25 and divide by 25, and my answer should be 3 over 4. Now that's converting a percentage into a fraction. But then when we're calculating a percentage, okay, guys, if we were calculating a percentage of something, a percentage, for example, if I was buying a property, if I was buying a house and my house cost me 150,000 US dollars, okay, and I was going to calculate the interest or how much the property increased. Remember, when we're increasing or decreasing the quantity, we must always remember it's going to be done out of 100%. And so just say, for example, my property of 150,000 had an increase of 6%. So suddenly my property value jumped by 6%. how do I go about to calculate the new value of my property? Okay, firstly, we say 100 plus the 6%, because now that would be my property value. 100%, which is what I bought it, increased by 6%. So now I'm calculating it out of 106%. Now, how do I write 106% as a decimal number? Okay, so I write 106 as a decimal number by saying 1.06. Okay, so the new value of my property then will be 150,000 multiplied by 1.06. And if you've got your calculators on you, or if you're calculating with me, you would know the value of the property would now be 159,000. Okay, so let's do a quick recap, guys. Let's do a quick recap of whatever we've done from the beginning. So we said when we are dividing, or when we are trying to convert a fraction to a decimal number, we're simply going to divide our numerator by denominator. And we did a couple calculations, and we saw how dividing our numerator by denominator, which I said you could use a calculator for, it's quite easy peasy. Everybody's satisfied with that. Then we went on and we learned a little bit more about how then we're converting decimals to fractions. And I told you about how I gave you the 3 rules about rule number 1. What is rule number 1? Rule number 1 was align them, put them all in line. Make sure they're all falling under each other. Rule number 2, so rule number 1 was line them up. We know rule number 2 was drop it down, because we needed to drop the decimal down to the correct spot when we add or subtract. And we know rule number 3 was, what was rule number 3? Who remembers what was rule number 3, guys? Rule number 3 was sorry about that, guys. Rule number 3 was for us to be able to, sorry, anybody remembers what was rule number 3? Somehow my brain seems to have gone on a lapse. Rule number 3 was fill them in. Sorry, guys. Rule number 3 was fill them in. Yes, thank you. Rule number 3 was fill them in. Sorry, looking at all these decimals, my brain's going a little bit cuckoo. Okay, guys, so I'm going to talk to you about one more thing. Okay, when it comes to percentages, another way of writing percentages is also writing, it's also part of writing a whole number, but instead we write it out of 100, like we've established. So percentage, another way of writing percentage, or another way of writing a whole number, we can write it in a percentage form. So if I had 30%, if I had to work out 30% of $2,700, one way to work this out is called a unitary method. What is a unitary method? Okay, a unitary method is that we work out the 1% of the amount first. So how will I work out 1% of the amount? So 1% of the amount, for example, 1% of 2,700 is, I'm going to divide by 100. When I divide 2,700 by 100, my 1% is therefore, we're then going to, sorry, not rand, is going to equal to $27. So now that I've established what's 1% of the amount, it's going to be easier for me to work out 30%. And how then do I work out 30%? I multiply by 30. And if I multiply $27 by my 30, my answer should be $810. Okay. So let's do a quick recap on a couple of things that we did today. So we know that we said when we were converting fractions to decimal numbers, we're going to divide the numerator and denominator. We spoke about how we applying rules when we use the adding or subtracting of decimal numbers. We spoke about percentages and how percentages are always worked out of 100. We learned a word called unitary, and we know that if we had to calculate an amount, like I said, $2,700, if I have to calculate 30% of it, first I work the unitary value of which means I divide it by 100, and that will give me the value of 1%, and then I multiply it by the percentage I need. We also worked out how we work out if our property is increasing or decreasing in value, what do we need to do and how we work it out. So firstly, we say the property is valued, we have 100% because that's the property value, and we add the value that is increased by, and then we multiply it.